On Saturday, White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt reposted an alleged account from one of Nicolas Maduro's security guards during the raid that last weekend. And it's a doozy. According to the guard, their air defense radars seemed to shut down entirely before suddenly seeing drones and then helicopters carrying American special operators. And once the engagement began, the account claims, roughly 20 Delta Force and FBI HRT operators quickly neutralized a defensive force in the hundreds of troops, using gunfire so precise it seemed to verge on superhuman, and some kind of top-secret sonic weapon that left troops vomiting blood in its wake. Now, sonic weapons aren't science fiction. The United States and several other nations have acoustic and infrasound weapons programs in development and even in the field, but there is nothing that we know about anyway that could do the things the guard's account says happened. And that leads to a pretty interesting mystery. Did American special operators use some kind of debilitating secret weapon during the Maduro raid, or is this all just some combat folklore that Uncle Sam is happy to see run rampant? Let's dive in and see if we can't figure it out. I'm Alex Hollings. Welcome to Firepower. About a week and a half ago now, members of America's elite Delta Force, joined by agents from the FBI's highly trained HRT, or Hostage Rescue Team, breached the hardened compound of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, defeated his security detail, and got the authoritarian leader and his wife into custody in just 3 minutes, according to reports. From there, they piled into the blacked-out helicopters of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, better known as the Night Stalkers, and departed under cover fire provided by American fighters circling overhead. Now, this operation, perhaps better than any other in the modern era, exemplified the stark differences between the world's most dominant military power and, well, everybody else. Venezuela may not be thought of in terms of global powerhouses, but it invested heavily into modernizing its military in the early to mid-2000s, purchasing a laundry list of advanced Russian and Chinese hardware and securing a place in the top 25% of all global military powers, at least according to open source analysis from outlets like Global Firepower. Or to put it another way, that means that roughly 3/4 of the nations on this planet, including a handful of American allies in NATO, actually rank lower in terms of military capability than the nation that just saw its leader bagged and snatched by American forces in the middle of the night. Put simply, if the United States can fly into Caracas and take Maduro without suffering so much as a single loss, there just aren't many nations on Earth that would stand a chance at stopping a similar raid into their own capital cities. And maybe it's because of the incredible technological capability overmatch combined with the tight-lipped discretion of Delta that's made this operation ripe for conspiracy theories, rumors, and baseless accusations about how the US enabled the operation. If you read the comments under any article or video about this topic, you will find people declaring that Venezuelan troops simply refused to fight, or that Maduro actually made a secret deal to be taken from Caracas, or that Venezuelan military leaders were paid off not to activate their air defenses or to alert reinforcements. You'll find Russian special operators doing interviews about how the raid wasn't actually all that impressive because the US used things like electronic warfare to stymie Venezuela's response, like that's cheating or something, and a long list of wildly baseless claims typed with such confidence and certainty that you'd think there'd be some kind of evidence to substantiate any of these claims. But for the most part, the evidence behind all of these assertions tends to boil down to, trust me, bro. Now, that's not to say that none of these claims are possible. Some of them, heck, all of them could be true for all we know, but without any actual evidence or even reliable eyewitness accounts, these claims are just fan fiction being shared online by people who like telling stories more than they like confirming what's true. And unfortunately for me, that's just never been my style. So when I first saw a tweet shared by White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt relaying the first-hand account of one of Maduro's guards, who claims the American operators used some kind of secret sonic weapon that left troops debilitated and coughing up blood, my BS detector did go on yellow alert. Now, I'll read you the post, as shared originally by conservative pundit Mike Netter, in its entirety now. So that way, we can all start from the same baseline. Quote, "This account from a Venezuelan security guard loyal to Nicolas Maduro is absolutely chilling, and it explains a lot about why the tone across Latin America suddenly changed. Security guard.
On the day of the operation, we didn't hear anything. We were on guard, but suddenly all our radar systems shut down without any explanation. The next thing we saw were drones, a lot of drones, flying over our positions. We didn't know how to react."
Interviewer. So what happened next? How was the main attack? Security guard.
After those drones appeared, some helicopters arrived, but they were very few. I think barely 8 helicopters. From those helicopters, soldiers came down, but a very small number, maybe 20 men. But those men were technologically very advanced. They didn't look like anything we fought against before.
Interviewer. And then the battle began? Security guard.
Yes, but it was a massacre. We were hundreds, but we had no chance. They were shooting with such precision and speed, it seemed like each soldier was firing 300 rounds per minute. We couldn't do anything.
Interviewer. And your own weapons, didn't they help? Security guard.
No help at all, because it wasn't just the weapons. At one point, they launched something. I don't know how to describe it. It was like a very intense sound wave. Suddenly, I felt like my head was exploding from the inside. We all started bleeding from the nose. Some were vomiting blood. We fell to the ground, unable to move.
Interviewer. And your comrades? Did they manage to resist? Security guard.
No, not at all. Those 20 men, without a single casualty, killed hundreds of us. We had no way to compete with their technology, with their weapons. I swear, I've never seen anything like it. We couldn't even stand up after the sonic weapon or whatever it was.
Interviewer. So do you think the rest of the region should think twice before confronting the Americans? Security guard.
Without a doubt, I'm sending a warning to anyone who thinks they can fight the United States. They have no idea what they're capable of. After what I saw, I never want to be on the other side of that again. They're not to be messed with.
Interviewer. And now that Trump has said Mexico is on the list, do you think the situation will change in Latin America? Security guard.
Definitely. Everyone is already talking about this. No one wants to go through what we went through. Now everyone thinks twice. What happened here is going to change a lot of things, not just in Venezuela, but throughout the region.
Now, I'm not saying that I just straight up don't believe it, but I am saying that it would take more than a single tweet with no other source to convince me, especially considering that single tweet came from a seemingly random radio host rather than an official source or even a news outlet that vets its information for accuracy. The tweet offers no citation or further information about who the interviewer was, where the interview was published, or how a radio host in California would even get his hands on it. Since the press secretary shared that tweet, though, well, this story's been picked up by news outlets all over the world and presented as though it's true, in headlines at least, even if the articles themselves often make it clear that these are unsubstantiated claims that were just shared on social media. But I want to be clear that some of the coverage of this story has genuinely been excellent, like Tim McMillan's dive into the claims and possible explanations for them, published by The Debrief this week. And I'll link to that article in the description below because it's well worth your time to read. Now, according to McMillan's research, the story in the tweet actually originated in a Spanish audio recording that was making the rounds on WhatsApp, a popular messaging application. And when I did get my hands on what was alleged to be the audio in question, however, it quickly became clear that something wasn't quite right. The transcript shared by Mike Netter clearly indicates a two-person conversation with an interviewer and interviewee, but the audio recording has only one person recounting his experience during the raid. And while I'm anything but fluent in Spanish, I was able to confirm that while the recording does address a sonic weapon of some sort, it doesn't relay the same details in the same ways, even when allowing for differences in translation. The only mention of a sonic weapon in the whole 4.5-minute audio recording translates as such, and I quote,
They had something that made me throw up. I was bleeding from my nose and I didn't know why. It was a whistle that sounded throughout Caracas, and it was already making people bleed from their noses in the streets. We couldn't move. That whistle paralyzed us. They say it's what they call passive sonic warfare. It was something very horrible.
Now that leaves us in a tough position. I can't seem to locate the original source of these claims, and the recording that people allege is the original source does not match the transcript. Of course, even if I were able to find the audio that first transcript allegedly came from, that still wouldn't really prove that the account was real, unless we could also verify who it came from and their proximity to Maduro during the raid. So, this story about secret sonic weapons is starting out on shaky ground, but that doesn't mean it can't be true. The audio recording may have come from a different guard who experienced the same thing, and we might actually be talking about two separate accounts of the same event. Or both of these accounts could have been fabricated to make a story that really did emerge from Venezuela's security guards that much more engaging when shared by content creators on social media. In this era of digital disinformation for fun and profit, all options are really on the table. But even if we can't verify the source, we can still assess the claims and compare them to known and emerging military technologies to see if they can hold water. So let's run through the sonic weapon claim from the transcript again and look for elements that we can run with. Quote,
At one point, they launched something. I don't know how to describe it. It was like a very intense sound wave. Suddenly, I felt like my head was exploding from the inside. We all started bleeding from the nose. Some were vomiting blood. We fell to the ground, unable to move.
Now, there are a few important elements here to highlight. The first is that he says they launched something that was like a very intense sound wave. Now, the other account referred to it as a whistle that sounded throughout Caracas. That suggests an airborne weapon whistling through the air, and based on the context, it seems the transcript is saying that whatever that weapon was, it was launched by the ground force conducting the assault. Of course, both alleged accounts refer to this as a sonic weapon, with the second claiming he was told it was passive sonic warfare by someone else. And while we may be inclined to think of advanced classified technology when we hear the phrase sonic weapon, it's important to understand that these guards, who, according to their own claims, were on the ground and debilitated, weren't in the best position to be identifying secret technology. And just as importantly, have a distinct motive to paint the American operation as technologically insurmountable. Otherwise, the fault for their failure to protect Maduro would fall squarely on their shoulders. The truth is, the American military has absolutely developed acoustic and area denial weapon systems, some of which are even small enough to be carried by individual operators or on specialized helicopters like the MH-60s and MH-47s operated by the Night Stalkers. The LRAD, or long-range acoustic device, for instance, comes in a variety of forms, including the man-portable LRAD 100X, which weighs just 22 pounds with batteries and accessories included, and can directionally broadcast the operator's voice or other sounds up to 600 meters, or around 1,968 feet, at volumes as high as 140 decibels, which equates to sustaining the sound of a gunshot for prolonged periods of time. Larger systems, like the 44-pound without a battery LRAD 500X, can broadcast sounds as far as 2,000 meters, about 6,560 feet, at continuous volumes as high as 149 decibels, which is about as loud as fireworks going off 3 feet from your head. The LRAD 950 NXT at around 208 pounds could be mounted on a helicopter and broadcast voice commands up to 3,000 meters, more than 9,800 feet, at volumes as high as 151 decibels. Depending on range and environment, any of these systems, or others like them, could cause serious pain and permanent damage to guards targeted by them. However, there's little evidence that sonic weapons of this sort could have had the results we're looking for. LRAD systems used against Somali pirates in 2005, for instance, was said to leave them nauseous and experiencing excruciating head and ear pain, but didn't result in anyone vomiting blood or having uncontrollable nosebleeds. Now, other types of acoustic weapons that have been in development but are not known to be in service, like infrasound weapons, or sound frequencies below human hearing, or even electromagnetic weapons designed to, quote, excite and interrupt the normal process of human hearing and equilibrium, are also possibilities. Infrasound in particular has been said to be potentially lethal, and is even the basis for infrasonic wave weapons patented by engineers out of China since 2011. Now, the United States military has likewise identified infrasonic weapons as one area of development in their non-lethal weapons NLW program, though to date, no actual operational system has ever been disclosed. However, the real efficacy of these kinds of systems is still subject to a lot of debate, with people like German physicist Dr. Jürgen Altmann publishing a 70-page peer-reviewed treatise in 2001 that, among other things, dispelled many popular assertions about the real viability of these weapons. But to be honest with you, I don't think we need to delve too deep into the black world of classified defense programs to find a reasonable explanation for the claims from these guards, assuming, of course, that they're true. The truth of the matter is, what they describe sounds an awful lot to me like what just happens to people when they experience the type of breaching tools utilized by special operators firsthand. If you've spent time in uniform or just play a lot of video games, then you might be familiar with the classic M84 stun grenade, more commonly known as a flashbang. Unlike standard explosive grenades, which have an explosive charge inside that detonates or burns at supersonic speeds to create a blast that can wound or kill, flashbang charges burn through deflagration instead, which is something we discussed at length in our video about rotating detonation combustion engines. Deflagration means the combustion is subsonic to minimize the lethality of the blast, but these stun grenades still produce a flash that's about 1 million candelas, which in human terms translates to about 1,000 times the brightness of your car's high beams, while simultaneously producing a noise, the bang and flashbang, that can range from 170 to 180 decibels, even louder than the most powerful acoustic weapons in American service that we are aware of. And just as importantly, it also produces an overpressure effect, or a sudden increase in air pressure around the detonation, and we will come back to that in just a minute. Now, a standard flashbang is so loud and bright that it can absolutely incapacitate anybody near it. That's why they're commonly used in breaching operations like the Maduro raid. But Tier 1 units like Delta aren't limited to standard troop loadouts, and instead, they often carry a specialized stun grenade that's commonly referred to as a 9-bang or 9-banger. Now, there are more than one type of 9-banger, but we'll use the CTS Combined Tactical Systems Multi-9 Flashbang to give us a general sense of how these systems work. With a 2.1-inch diameter, about a quarter-inch bigger than a standard flashbang, and a total length of 5.7 inches versus the M84's 5.25, the Multi-9 does just what you'd think it would do. Instead of producing a single loud flash and bang, it produces 9 of them, staggered about a half a second apart from one another. Now, this creates a compounding effect on those exposed to it that can leave them completely disoriented and in a great deal of pain. That means being subjected to the flash, the bang, and the overpressure effect of a flashbang 9 times in about 4.5 seconds. And while these systems are considered non-lethal, the danger to those exposed increases dramatically in enclosed spaces, like, say, during a firefight in a fortified palace. Now, I'll quote a report about the human effects of flashbang grenades published by the Institute for Defense Analysis in 2018. Quote, "In an open field, the energy of the blast waves decrease exponentially from the origin of the blast. However, indoors, blast waves rebounding off walls and rigid objects result in complex pressure waves, which may enhance the original blast wave. Particularly for the thorax, the traumatic loading of the chest wall by the blast causes a shock wave that propagates into the lung, and the pressure difference across the alveolar capillary interface causes disruption, hemorrhage, pulmonary contusion, and subcutaneous emphysema. Pulmonary injuries may be life-threatening if extensive." Now, those are the sorts of injuries that might result in nosebleeds and vomiting blood. But what about the whistling sound people reported that came with it? Well, that might have been the sound of flashbang grenades whizzing through the air as they were launched in multiple directions by grenade launchers. Or it could have been the result of other breaching tools that could produce even more dramatic overpressure effects, like the Marine Corps' SMAW-NE, which is short for Shoulder-Launched Multi-Purpose Assault Weapon Novel Explosive. This weapon was designed to be used against caves and bunkers, using a miniature thermobaric warhead to create a powerful overpressure wave that's strong enough to collapse lightly constructed buildings. These specific weapons do seem a bit less likely to me, but a similar system with similar capabilities is certainly not outside the scope of possibility here. But what ultimately matters most here is that these are publicly disclosed and well-known breaching tools and weapon systems that are capable of producing exactly the sort of anatomical effects we see outlined in the two alleged first-hand accounts from guards who say they were present at the raid. And that really forces us to engage directly with the human element of this story. Earlier, I mentioned a Venezuelan soldier's potential motive for portraying the American assault as a technological tidal wave that was just too tall to overcome. And while that might provide some motivation for pushing this story about a secret sonic weapon, I think it's also entirely possible that this really is what Maduro's guards think happened, even if it didn't. In another part of the recording, that alleged guard recalls drones appearing before the helicopter and says, I quote, "Venezuela has never trained against a drone. We don't have drones. We don't have the technology." Now, we may be inclined to think of Maduro's security as elite and highly trained, and maybe they even were, but it's unlikely even they had ever experienced anything like a coordinated raid conducted by America's most elite covert special operations unit. With 9-bangs detonating all around you, breaching tools firing to rip through structures or doors, and precision gunfire ripping through the inky darkness that retook your line of sight once that flashing finally stopped. For most people on this planet, being targeted in a Delta raid is like being attacked by a superhuman force. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if technological folklore was born out of it. Of course, that doesn't mean it's impossible that the DoD brought some kind of exotic and never-before-seen infrasound or microwave weapon to Venezuela to neutralize Maduro's guards. Anything is possible, and there are certainly efforts underway to field just that kind of capability. But if we zoom out a bit to consider the elements of this story at face value, two separate but similar accounts of an incident, only one of which has surfaced as a recording, and both of which can only be traced back to Twitter accounts with no apparent connection to the Venezuelan military, claim Delta Force had some secret sonic weapon that neutralized them. And we know that Delta carries publicly disclosed weapons that could produce the very same result, likely even better than a secret sonic weapon could. Now that leaves three possibilities for you to choose from. The first is that it's all true, and the US military really did use a secret sonic weapon during the Maduro raid, but for my money, I'd bet on one of the two following options. Either the story was fiction from the start, or these accounts just represent the fragile memory of the few lucky survivors of an attack from America's very own boogeyman, the Delta Force. But as always, you're free to choose for yourself. And with that ends yet another edition of Firepower from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, please make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.